Tonight, this is Jesus' base for his Galilean ministry. Up here on the screen, you can see a map. Obviously the scale is off because those harbors were not that big. But I wanted to show you this for a couple of reasons. If you look up at the top, you'll see that the Jordan River actually comes down. It starts in the area of Caesarea Philippi, and that's where the headwaters, these springs come up. They form the headwaters, and they come all the way down through the Golan to the northern part of the Sea of Galilee. And then it goes into the Sea of Galilee, and then it comes out down here at the bottom, and then it does end in the Dead Sea. And so in the Jewish way of thinking, or the Mediterranean world, water, just because it hits something big doesn't mean that it stops. If it keeps going, so it keeps the same name, the Jordan River. The Sea of Galilee, I've told you before, is not very big. It's 13 miles long from the bottom all the way up to the top, and it's 7.5 miles wide at its widest point. And it's a sea of ancient harbors. And there are some very important harbors. Obviously, up there at the top, at the kind of that northwest point, you see Capernaum. You go a couple of Roman miles down to the south there on the left side. You come to Tabgha. We're going to talk about that place as well. We will see that in Israel. Tabgha is a corruption of the word heptapegon, which is 7 streams. And Tabgha, heptapegon, you can kind of hear the similarities there, but it's a corruption, and nobody's been able to find the 7 streams. There are streams up there. They've just not found 7, so they don't know how the name came about. You drop down to Gennesar, another big port harbor area. If you're going to Israel in June, you're going to see a boat that was discovered in that area. There was a first century boat that had been buried in the mud when the Sea of Galilee receded. A couple of fishermen found it, so they built a wall around it, and it was a drought, and that's why the sea was receding. As they were moving the mud out and pulling this boat out, it started raining again, so they were able to get this fragile first century boat out of the mud just as water started coming over the wall, and it's in a museum right now, and we're going to show you some pictures of it. Magdala is where Mary Magdalene is from. Hamat Tiberias, Hamat is the word for hot springs. And Hamat Tiberias was the capital of this area during the time of Jesus, big Roman city named after Tiberius. And we'll probably you'll see right there in the middle of the east coast there in the Decapolis, you'll see on the shore a little place called Kursi. That again is a corruption of Gergesa, Kursi, Gergesa. The words kind of run together when you have different dialects and different tongues being spoken in the area. But this is the area where the demoniac legion in Mark chapter 4 was run into. And one of the guys that's in the book that I recommended, Charles Page, when he wrote Jesus and the Land and the Places in the Bible, those 2 books I recommended last week, he was actually the lead archaeologist in digging up Kursi 10, 15 years ago. Biblical texts that pertain to Capernaum. Mark chapter 1, Luke chapter 4, you've got, this very busy Sabbath in the life of Jesus. He has gone to Capernaum. He's making that his home base rather than Nazareth. He's run into trouble in Nazareth. He is making the move to go to Capernaum because of the different kinds of individuals and opportunities that he's going to have there. But he goes into the synagogue on a Sabbath. He teaches. Everybody's amazed. A demoniac comes in. He heals the demoniac. Then he leaves, goes across the street to Peter's house, heals the mother-in-law, and then later that night, after the sun has gone down, Shabbat or the Sabbath has ended, the whole town turns out, and he spends the night healing the sick and the demon-possessed and teaching. In Mark chapter 2, famous story about the paralytic. So many people, when Jesus is in town, they're coming to listen to him speak and to teach, asking him to do miracles, that these 4 guys with this paralytic, their friend, can't get to Jesus, and what do? They go up on the roof, and they tear away the roof, and they're able to lower him down. That story also indicates that probably Capernaum was not a very wealthy town. If you go just to the north from Capernaum, to Chorazin. They have basalt slabs for their roofs. That would be a much harder thing to come by, more expensive. In Capernaum, they had thatch and wood and sod and mud and dirt and grass up there on their roof. It was probably a sign that they were not all that wealthy in terms of their per income, their per capita income. Mark chapter 9, the dispute on, it's in Capernaum, who's the greatest in the kingdom of God. Matthew chapter 4, the parable of the sower. Probably in this area right here, there's a natural theater right here, kind of an indentation there at the shore, where a lot of people could kind of stand or sit on that hillside. Jesus could push out from the boat and teach them, the parable of the sower. Matthew chapter 8, Luke chapter 7, the healing of the centurion's servant. The centurion is the one that helped them to build their synagogue. Remember that he sends the group of elders to Jesus. This man should, if you can do anything, he deserves it. He helped us to build our synagogue. The fact that the Jews allowed a Gentile to help them build their synagogue, another indication they were probably not all that wealthy. Matthew chapter 17, you have, Jesus being asked about the temple tax. He tells, he says, we don't want to offend anybody, but and tells Peter to go down to the water to fish. They pull out this tilapia africanus, and they pull out the temple tax out of the fish's mouth. That was all in the area of Capernaum. You have Luke chapter 4, Christ is in Nazareth and they're giving him a hard time, and that's where the physician heal thyself, do hear the wonders that you did in Capernaum. That's where that text takes place. Again, a reference to Capernaum. John chapter 4, the healing of the royal official son in Capernaum while Jesus is in Cana. Just say the word and it will be done. John 6, Jesus walks on water after feeding the 5,000. The disciples are in a boat they're headed back to Capernaum, their home base. And in Matthew chapter 9 and Mark chapter 2, it's referred to his own city. It's the city that he adopted. Now, what's really interesting is that this town obviously had Jews and Gentiles. There's a Roman contingency in it. Nazareth, and we'll talk more about this in detail when we get to Nazareth, but Nazareth is a Messianic community. And after the exile, you have people coming back to the land. And, the Alexander the Great and his army come through, and then he dies, and then it's the Ptolemies out of Africa that are in control of this, and then it's the Seleucids out of Syria that are in control of this period. And, the Ptolemies, they didn't care who you worshiped. They were very lax. The Seleucids, on the other hand, they were forcing, the pagan gods. And that's when you have the Maccabean revolt. And that's when the temple is taken about 150 BC. It is retaken, is re-sanctified, and all of that. And that's where Hanukkah comes from, and the menorah, and all of that. But there were people, even though that temple was retaken and it was sanctified and all of this stuff was happening, and it was kind of back in the hands of the Jews, there were lots of Jews that believed that the family that had taken over the priesthood was apostate. And so they didn't want anything to do with the south. And so they would try to stay away from Jerusalem as much as they could. And a town like Nazareth, there was another town up in the northern part, where if I had the map back up there, it would be where the Jordan comes out of the south side of the Sea of Galilee. There was a town in Hebrew that would have been known as Star, which was a messianic designation. And so Nazareth, which probably goes to the book of Isaiah and out of the root of Jesse, and Netzer and root kind of sound the same. Nazareth was one of these really super, super small, super conservative towns. And for Jesus to leave there and to go to a place like Capernaum, having grown up in a really conservative town like that, remember his brothers and his mother tried to go to Capernaum and bring him home, saying he was out of his mind. That would be one of the reasons why they did that. It did not make sense in their culture and mentality for him to leave Nazareth to go to a place like Capernaum. In terms of the geographical notes, the city is located on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. This is a little inset, Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, Dead Sea. It's on the northwest side. or as you can see here, Capernaum is part of this northwest point of the Sea of Galilee, that where the Via Maris, the way of the seas, kind of parallels. The name Capernaum is Kafar Naum, which the word Kafar means village. It's the village of a guy named Nahum. Who this Nahum is, nobody knows. Probably some kind of it's just a patron saint of the city. But Capernaum is an old city on the north side of the Sea of Galilee, closest river on the northwest point to the shore of to the Jordan River. It's part of the evangelical triangle, which is a term that folks use to describe the triangle between Chorazin to the north, Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee, and Bethsaida, which is on the east side of the Jordan River and the northeast point of the Sea of Galilee. And it forms a triangle. And we're told in the Bible that most of Jesus' miracles was done in that triangle right there, thus the name, the evangelical triangle. It's located on the Via Maris, which meant that there were lots of non-Jews that were traveling up and down that road. Herod the Great, when he died, Capernaum was given to his son Herod Antipas. You remember that Archelaus was given, basically he was given the south, Judea, and the lion's portion being the oldest. Philip and Herod got the territories more to the north. There was a custom office because of the Via Maris and because of the borders. At this time, in Israel's history, Capernaum was close to the borders. There was a small garrison of soldiers there, and there was a customs office. What is the famous tax collector that came from Capernaum? Starts with a Mad and ends with a Hugh. Matthew, there we go. During the time of Jesus, when we talk about population density, if you do urban studies, they always want to talk about urban density. The first time I was introduced to this, we were in Rio de Janeiro, and we were in a part of that city that today is just right under 10 million people. And we were in a part of the city that if everyone that lived in the apartment complexes left the apartment complexes, you couldn't fit them all on the ground. That is tremendous people density. The number of people per square mile is just huge. In San Antonio, I think we have 12 people per square mile. I mean, that's actually pretty high, but it's not as high as it was in the first century. You have a city that's 1,500 square yards, and you have anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 people living in the 1,500 square yards, Jews and Gentiles together. And one of the things that Wayne's going to do some teaching tonight, one of the things that Wayne is going to show you is that, the insula, which is the way that their houses were built, it's room connected to room, connected to room, connected to room. Privacy, what in the world is that? People did not live, privately like they do in the suburbs. If you go to New York City, nobody lives in their apartments. They all live down on the ground. And that is much closer to the ancient world than what we experience in San Antonio in the suburbs. We go into our house, shut the door, turn on the TV, and, I mean, how many times does an ambulance go down your street, and if you don't hear it, you don't even know it's there until the next day? That kind of thing doesn't happen in the ancient world. I mean, everything is really open in that society. Other historical notes, the first century buildings in Capernaum were built with black basalt stones, which again, an indication that they were not a wealthy town at that time and that they needed a Gentile to help them build the synagogue, further attestation to that. The roofs were sod, grass, rather than basalt slabs, as found in Chorazin. Probably manufactured, this should not say wine presses, it should say olive presses. That's a typo on my part. I wish I could say I typed olive and it auto-corrected to wine. I don't know, it was a moment. But when you go to, one of the really funny things about when you go to Capernaum is you walk into the city itself, which again, 1,500 square yards. There are these presses all over the place. They're like plastic water bottles. I mean, they're just kind of strewn all over the place. And there are 5 times as many of these kinds of presses found in Capernaum than any other place in the Mediterranean world of Israel. There is some theory that was maybe one of their commerce generators was that they built these presses in Capernaum. Archaeological notes. The great Edward Robinson, 1838, right in there, surveyed Capernaum, found the White Synagogue, but this place, Capernaum, was known as Tel Tanhum at the time. Never made the connection that it was Capernaum. The Tahum had nothing to do with the name Capernaum, but had everything to do with a rabbi who was buried there. And it really wasn't a tell. A tell, as you know, is a mound. It wasn't a tell. It was actually just a bunch of ruins. But it was associated with the burial place of this rabbi. He finds the synagogue there, correctly identifies it as a synagogue, but did not know that it was Capernaum. Germans, Kohl and Watzinger, in 1905, clear the area even more, and they're able to dig up the White Synagogue as it was located. This is actually a Franciscan site now. The Franciscans out of the Catholic Church, these guys are, they're like the Jesuits, just not tough. The Jesuits are the hombres of the Catholic Church. They're academics who go to the hardest places on earth. Franciscans, academic as well, but they go, to Hawaii. And so in 68, this group known as Custodia de Terra Santa, which means the caretakers of the Holy Land, led by two archaeologists, Corbo and Lafredo. Lafredo was in his own right. Stanislaw Lafredo was a great archaeologist. Corbo was the real deal. He was the preeminent one. They begin to renew the excavations in 68. I don't know why I have two slides. Again, it auto-corrected itself. And what they begin to find is the synagogue, after they correctly identify it as Capernaum. There is a woman by the name of Agaria, who in the early 4th century, after the world has kind of become Christian because of Constantine, she takes a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and she's going everywhere and asking questions, and Capernaum is one of the places that she walks into, and it's a lot from her notes, a lot of what she has written in her notes that helps them to identify that this is Capernaum, and that this synagogue, and that's a big debate, and Wayne's going to talk about that here in just a minute, is this the synagogue that Jesus performed his miracles in. Besides the synagogue, there's also the Peter house. This is the place, you remember Mark chapter 1, after the stuff that happens in the synagogue, he goes about 30 yards to Peter's mother-in-law's, or Peter's house, and heals the mother-in-law. So you got the synagogue, the Peter's house. Hadrian, who is early 2nd century emperor of Rome in the 130s, there's a mile marker because of the Via Maris. There's a mile marker that's been found here that's really famous. Unfortunately, we were there at the wrong time of day. It's in the shade, so we can't get a lot of the inscription. But there's a Roman mile marker on the Via Maris from the time of Hadrian there. There are the presses, and we get an idea of how the olive presses functioned and the different kinds of pressings that were done, and some of the most ornate stone carvings. Some of the most beautiful ornate stone carvings you will find anywhere are right here in this town. And so the entrance to Capernaum, if would you be able to get those lights for a second? When the lights go off, you can see the picture in a little bit more detail. This is the entrance to Capernaum, and this is where you pay, to get in, like you're going to the zoo. The basalt stone is what was used to build this building, this modern building, off to the side, in keeping with the architecture and the way things were constructed and built in the 1st century. That's the way they built this building. This is actually a new entrance. The old entrance is back a little bit further, and there was this gigantic bougainvillea, one of the most beautiful I've ever seen in my life. This just is incredible. Is fuchsia pink? Most vibrant fuchsia color you have ever seen in your life, and one of the other places where I took a couple of petals and pressed them into my journal. But this is the entrance into Capernaum, the town of Jesus, the heart of the city. And again, we're talking about 1,500 square yards. You have The north orientation to the left, the Sea of Galilee to the south is to the right. You have Peter's house, which is an octagon shape structure over the archaeological finds. There's a reason why it's an octagon, and about 30 yards across or so, you have the synagogue. And I'll turn it over to Wayne, and he's going to talk about the synagogue. Do you need the lights back on?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Let me go back. This kind of shows you that the synagogue sticks out. There's no doubt. It's white. Everything else around it is a basalt, the dark stone, the whole city. And then, of course, this particular palace is limestone that has been brought in. And it's about 4 feet, give or take. I'm not going to say it's 4 feet, but it's raised above everything. It's kind of weird. You go in and you look, and it's kind of raised up, and you see it. They think that it was 2-story. The part on the left would have been the 2-story part, would have been the upper part. They thought, and there's disagreements one way or the other about it, they thought the upper part was maybe for the women. There's a lot of disagreement about that, but that's at least some of the things. They think it's a 3rd century. Just because of the architecture, the decorations, the carvings and stuff that seem to go along with that. It measures about 79 feet long and about 60 feet wide. This cutaway, as far as this right, would have been covered and probably was the school, used for more than just that, but a lot of the teaching was in this, and the later on, it's just a courtyard. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as it's kind of divided into different areas. But it's evidently set on top of what is supposedly the synagogue that Jesus taught in. The synagogue itself is set north and south. This would be the south part of it, with 3 openings that go into what is called the prayer hall. It's divided by columns that we showed you just a minute ago. You can see the little columns has 3 areas that you can walk into. And then on the outside of it, I think we have a picture of it here. That's just another entrance, one of the entrances that goes in. And then as this, you can see all the way around the edge of it is seating on both sides, except on the south, of course, which is open. The hall itself, or the place itself, is divided. It has a western patio, and then, of course, it has a southern entrance into it. And then there's a little bitty kind of a study area on the northwest corner. You can see it up there. So that's just kind of a study area itself. I'm not as good as Mark. I have to look at sheet notes. So that's the way it is. One of my favorite pictures, and one of Mark's favorite, this picture is hanging in my office. This is sitting there. You can see these huge pillars, and they have inscriptions that are written on them. One's in Arabic and one's in Greek. And it's basically all they are is kind of telling about people that have made this possible, or at least made that particular thing possible. He talked a little bit about Edward Robinson, who came in, was the first discovery. Not sure, but back then he probably may have done more harm than good when he was digging through it. He probably tore up as much as he found. Then it goes on into the order, the Franciscan order. They bought it in 1894. Orfali was an archaeologist that started to dig and to excavate into it. He was there from 1921 through 26. His life got cut a little bit short. He was in a car wreck in 28 and died in that. Then you go up to Corbo and Lafredo. In 1968, who excavated inside, again, of the synagogue that we will see. They dug down and found the walls. The walls are black underneath. And you can see this as the difference in the walls. So they weren't sure, and there was a lot of discussions. And finally, when they started digging down, they found this, that basically the synagogue that we will see, or the remains that we will see, are built right on top of what they feel like was the synagogue that Jesus taught in and did his miracles in that. Some of the trenches that they dug, and you'll see some of those as we go there. They've left them open where you can kind of see down, but there's really not enough, to see to say. As they dug down, they think the opening for Jesus's synagogue was open to the east. No real reasons why that I could find anyway. The one thing that Mark touched on it, a lot of things that happened there in Mark 1 and 21. That's when they found the man with the impure spirits, and Jesus went in and told him to be quiet and got him out. You also saw that he healed a man with the palsied hand, and then the paralytic that he talked about, which kind of made sense because there were so many people there. They thought, or they think, that to get into the upper floor, there were staircases built up on the outside, so that was kind of the way they got up there. And again, Capernaum was probably not a very high income place because of the roofs that you see in other places are more of the rock and flat, and everything here was basically, the roofs were basically thatch. Oop, went too far. Let me back up, sorry. But as you walk in, and you'll go in, or those of you that are going will walk in, and you can go all over this. As far as what I thought, I don't know what kind of guide we'll have this time, but the guide we had last time told us, there's a 1, 2, or a 3, and that 1 is where he was, and this is not a 1 because this is a 3rd to a 5th century synagogue, but 4 feet below it is probably a 1, and that's pretty cool. For me, this was early, and I knew I was in a lot of trouble after some of this because just didn't feel like I belonged there. I mean, Jesus was there. I mean, that's just amazing. And the whole trip's like that. And it gets more and more and more as you go. You're going to go into Jerusalem. But I mean, this area, and it's not but 7 miles across there. That's where most of the miracles happened. And you're gonna get to be a part of that. And going into this synagogue that's not the one that he actually taught in, but you dig down 4 feet, and they think that's kind of an X marks the spot. That's a pretty big deal as far as I was concerned. So I don't know. It's just close to Jesus as I'll get, except when you go to Jerusalem, and then man, you touch a rock that he probably touched. That's amazing. But anyway, that's just kind of an overview of the synagogue that's there in Capernaum. It's really kind of a cool place. It really stands out, especially with the rest of the town right around it, 1,000. I thought, this when they were just talking about it before I got there. I thought the synagogue, I'm thinking in our world, our church is huge, and this one's a little bitty, but there was only 1,000 people there too, and the city itself is going to be, it's amazing as far as you walk around, but it's The houses are tiny. I mean, they're like tiny. They're all just jammed into a really small area. So anyway, that's what I got. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mr.
One of the really interesting things too about a synagogue is, a synagogue is not a place for worship. Synagogue is like a community center. Synagogues don't appear in the Old Testament. It looks like they appear during the exile. And so you have, if you don't mind getting the lights again there, Greg, during the exile, they're often Babylon. And, Psalm 137, we're by the rivers of Babylon. And we're weeping because our captors are saying to us, will you sing the songs of Zion? And we can't. How can we sing the songs of Zion in a foreign country? And so the best theories, I think, are the ones that say the synagogues were created during the time of the exile as a way of promoting and perpetuating the Jewish culture. And as I said before, when they started to repatriate the land, there was some issues with the land being run by the Maccabee family, the Hasmonean dynasty, and was that priesthood that established itself along with the kings, were they apostate or not? And so the synagogues were appearing in the northern part as well. And so you have a place where they go in. There's not one in Capernaum, but in Chorazin there has been discovered at the synagogue there the Moses seat, where you would sit down and you would read the scripture and expound on it, which is what Jesus did. One of the things I thought of when you look at those, they're like old school community center bleachers. They're not seats are made out of wood, but the old concrete kind. People are sitting around those things. They have a little nave or a little area where the scrolls are kept. They bring Jesus the scroll, and he reads the scroll from the Moses seat and begins to expound and to teach the way that a rabbi would. Over here on the right, something that we don't talk a lot about unless we're talking about the early years of Jesus' life is a thing called the Beit Hop Midrash, which would be the school that would teach young girls how to keep a kosher kitchen, young men how to keep the law and responsibilities of being a man in Israel during those days. And those would have taken place in this area to the right that Wayne was talking about, that would not have been one story as the theory is for this white synagogue on the left side where the nave is and the aisles and the prayer hall is. But these synagogues were an essential place for Jewish people to meet, even to this day. This is where they meet. It's more of a community center where they're able to perpetuate the faith and to teach. This is the milestone. As I said, it's not a great picture because it's taken in the shade of a tree. And between Wayne and Jordan and I, we were not going to pick this thing up and move it. It is huge. But there's inscriptions that you can read. Even if you don't know Latin, you can read the Latin letters in all caps that says Hadrian on it. And again, it's just a piece of history from a time that's very important to us as disciples of Jesus. Some of my favorite sculptures, though, are in Capernaum. The ability that they had to decorate stone, and these are limestone, and these are from a later period, but they reflect the way the Jewish people were thinking during the time of Jesus. What you have here is a lintel, and in the book of Deuteronomy, the land of Israel is described as a land flowing with milk and honey, right? And there's a description of all of the fruits and all of that stuff, and that's what is represented on this lintel. Unfortunately, I just don't have a good picture of it, but when we go to Capernaum, you're able to stand in front of this thing and you can see grapes sort of moving from left to right. You can see grape clusters. You can see pomegranates. You can see the grains. There are dates. It is absolutely a stunning piece of art. And besides that, you have as you see on the left side of this picture, you see the Star of David. This is one of the few places that you're going to find the Star of David in Israel. And it's here in Capernaum, and it was after the time of Jesus, obviously, but you can see that, the Star of David has been carved into this lintel. Up here, this is probably one of my favorite out of the all that you find in Capernaum. This thing is really big, and as I said at the early bird class, I would love for this to be like my dining room table or my my ottoman or something, or a coffee table in my living room. This is really again, it's a gorgeous piece of art that formed the part of one of those columns. And so, as we've talked earlier, Hasmoneans, the Maccabean revolt in 150 A.D., starting in the village of Modane, and they take the land back from the Syrians and from, Antiochus Epiphanes, who was that madman that, was going to worship, a swine in the altar. They just revolt against all of that. And one of the parts of that history is that the Jews are able to take back the temple. They rededicate it, reconsecrate it. You know the story. They didn't think they had enough oil, but they had oil for all of the days that become to us today as Hanukkah. So that in the middle is the menorah. The thing over there on the right, on the left, is the shovel for the incense. I have never seen this ever. And that is a stunning piece of art right there, to find that shovel for the incense to the left of the menorah. Now, again, the menorah, the temple, altar of incense, the shovel where you would put the incense on the altar. You see something over to the right. What do you think that is? Yes, well done. Which horn? The shofar. The thing that was blown at the top of the temple. And when you see this, it is just really kind of a cool piece of art to behold. This is, what does this look like to you? What is down? Yeah, you're in the vicinity. But what is that down on the bottom? Yes. What this is a representation of is, you'll remember in 1 Samuel, the Philistines capture the Ark of the Covenant, and then everything gets really diseased up, right? And so the Philistines decide they're going to send it back to the Jewish folk, back to Israel. So they put the Ark of the Covenant in a wagon, and that's what that carving is the Ark of the Covenant, a representation of the Ark of the Covenant being sent back to Israel in 1 Samuel. And the rest of the story, they break the wagon down and they sacrifice the oxen on top of it and all that good kind of stuff. But that is not quite as clear of, because of the eroding of the edges and all of that through the centuries. It's not clear cut like the others are, but absolutely another stunning piece of architecture. Here are the presses. You actually see in this particular picture the two kinds of presses that were prevalent in Capernaum. This right here would have been just a little bowl or a little rock basalt indention that they cut in the rock in order for, as the oil is being pressed, it would run down a channel and then off into a little phalange that would drop the oil, and it would collect and pool in this little basin. This one over here to the left, that would have been the first, and that would have been the roughest of them, but a first pressing. They're thrown in there. A rod was put in that square hole, and then it was spun around. And again, there's a little cutout where the oil would have come down and would have pooled. They would have taken those olives, put them in a sack, put them on the top of this one, put something like wood plates or something on top of that, and then they would have used the fulcrum and lever technology to they would have, it would be pressing down on it, and they would hang rocks, weights off of the end of that lever, and it would press down using the olives as the fulcrum, and you can see the channel right below that it would drip down, and then it would pool as well and be collected. And that was the technology of the time, and it's not changed all that much. It's just a little cleaner. And again, you have just all of these presses all over the place. You know, like I said, like water bottles that are just kind of strewn on the street. I mean, we were joking with the early class. I mean, you know, if you picked one up and walked off, would they miss it? I mean, they're all over the place, and they're just a little hard to get into your luggage. Capernaum is associated with Peter, right? Not just Jesus, but with Peter. One of the theories is that, and I don't agree with this, but you'll hear it from time to time, that Peter, who is from Bethsaida, which is on the eastern side of the Jordan River, where it connects to the Sea of Galilee, marries a woman from Capernaum, and that's why he has a house in Capernaum. I don't dig that theory very much, because in that culture, the man never went to the woman's house. The woman always went to the man's house, and that's part of the betrothal period. You walk around the hoopta and all that kind of stuff, and you're married. But before the marriage is consummated, the man goes to his father's house and builds a room on it, usually 9 to 12 months. Then he comes back and get his wife so that she can be where he is. And in my father's house there are many rooms. And you get the imagery in the New Testament where Jesus is talking about, the end of time in which all of God's people will be together in God's house, and in God's house there are many rooms, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to get you to take you, the bride, to be where I am. And Peter, though, I think ends up in Capernaum with his family because of commerce. It is a place where he is able to probably create more income for himself and to create a business on that end of the Sea of Galilee. This is the entrance to Peter's house. I mean, when you saw it in the very first picture, it looked like an octagon. When you look at it from ground level, it looks like the Astrodome. It's just kind of this dome, half dome, that goes over the top of this place where, and again, there's lots of debates. Wayne mentioned the 1, 2, or 3. 1 is, X marks the spot. 2, you're closer than you've ever been before. 3, well, we're at least in the same country. This is probably a 2. We know that Peter had a house in Capernaum. We know that he had family there, and that's one of the reasons he was there. We know that he fished from the coast west of Capernaum, along the coast. So there, we know that his house is here someplace. It's only 1,500 square yards. If you're not right on the place, you're closer than you've ever been before. Now, the reason I think this particular place is because going all the way back to the 3rd and the 4th century, there have been people who thought that early Christians during the time of the book of Acts and later worshipped in this particular, there's a round room that has been found that has Christian inscriptions on it. This Agaria, this is one of the things that she talked about, that she was taken to a room where it was said to her, this is the place where Peter is from. And there are inscriptions. When you go up into this is actually a church. This building that has been built over Peter's house is actually a church. And so when you go in, they ask you to be, reverent and to be quiet. But there's kind of a vestibule that goes on the outer. I mean, the thing is wide open, but there's a vestibule that is kind of, that is on the perimeter of the interior of this place. And then the center of it is glass. And you can stand up there and look down. And I don't know how many, was it 10 feet or 15 feet, something like that? You look down and you can see the round room where the inscriptions were found, and then you find these outer walls. And if you look very closely, you can see the round room that you're looking down into, which was supposed to be Peter's house. But if it was Peter's house or not, nobody knows. But what they do know is that it was a church, a Christian church at one time. And then you can see that there is an octagon-shaped wall around it. And the octagon-shaped wall is significant in the sense, and that's why this structure over the top of it is in the shape of an octagon, is that when Constantine was marking places in Israel as holy sites, he always built an octagon-shaped something around it. And then in 1990, when they built this church, it's actually a Catholic church, over this site, in keeping what it was with the Constantine practice of building an octagon, they built it in the shape of an octagon as well. But you can see the round building, which is, the center of it all. You see the octagon wall. And that's the entrance into that round room where the carvings are found. And then in Matthew chapter 11, as Wayne said, when you're standing in that synagogue, this is X marks the spot. It's a 1. And we also know that in Matthew chapter 11, we are told that Jesus did most of his miracles, and they were performed in this evangelical triangle of Chorazin and Capernaum and Bethsaida. And yet, these people are not responding to him in faith, even though the majority, most of his miracles, the breaking of God's kingdom into the world is happening in this place. And he says, what kind of hearts do you have to be able to see this continually over and over and over and over? Not just, water to wine like he did in Cana, but here is a man who is tortured by a demon and he's made whole. Here is a guy who is a paralytic. He's made to rise up. There are people who are ill, who are being made sick. It says the whole town in Mark chapter 1. The whole town. And evening after that Sabbath in Mark 1 showed up at his house, and he spent the night healing the sick and throwing out the demons and restoring wholeness to people. And he's saying, if those things had been done in a place like Sodom, they would have repented and been here to this day. And he says to Capernaum, are you going to be lifted up? No, you're going to go down to Hades too. For if the miracles had been formed in Sodom, it was Tyre and Sidon, and with Capernaum it's Sodom, it would have remained to this day. But I tell you, it'll be more bearable for Sodom on the day of judgment than for you. And so, like Wayne said, you go into Capernaum, and this is a place where there was as great a manifestation of the kingdom of God breaking into history and breaking into our consciousness, and yet they said, I don't think so. And, it's right over here that Jesus tells the parable of the sower, which obviously is about the power of the Word of God, but it's a parable more about what kind of heart do you have. Is your heart hard? Is your heart hard so that the seed, which is the word, hits it and bounces off? Is it the rocky path where something's able to come like a bird and take it away, or is it the thorns where it gets a little bit of root, but there's so many pleasures in the world that it chokes it out? Or is your heart the kind of soil that the Word of God, the manifestation of the kingdom of God, can enter your heart and produce a harvest, 30 and 60 and 100-fold? And you can't help but, as you're standing in the synagogue, as Wayne said, or you're walking around and looking at all of these things that were the part of daily commerce, the olive presses and the Via Maris was right there, and there was a customs office and the mile markers and all of that. In the middle of everyday commerce and business and life, there was healings, and there were powers of darkness being defeated, and there was teaching that was absolutely, the texts say over and over, they were amazed, they were amazed, they were amazed, they were amazed. And yet, you're standing there and you're going, this city right here was woed, not wooed. It was wooed first, but then he woed it because they did not respond. And you stand there and you just go, this is real. This is real. Jesus himself did his miracles here and did his teachings here and wanted human beings to respond to it and to embrace him in faith. And a lot of them didn't. Hey, we'll see you next week. We'll see you on Sunday too.